Hi, it's Amanda. Welcome to my channel. So Jamie is here, and I just wanted to drop in and share that news. I went into labor on his actual due date, which is crazy, March 26th, and he was born at 7:06 on March 27th. Quick Google search suggests that being born on your due date, or I guess going into labor on your due date, are actually 5% odds. And I actually thought it would have been a little bit less, but anyway. So delivery was an absolute nightmare for me. The epidural guy was a real pro, so that was great. In and out of my back in less than 10 minutes, so this wins best epidural of the 3 births. For those of you who don't have kids and or for whatever reason don't know what an epidural is, it's a paralytic that they put in your back to dull the pain of what is the barbaric, sick way that women are required to give birth. Unpopular opinion, whatever. I am also very sad personally to report that I have now given birth both ways. After trying and failing for probably an hour and a half, I was told that I had to have a C-section. Jamie was either too big or I was too small or a combination of both. At only 6 pounds, 14 ounces at birth, his head kept getting stuck behind my pelvic bone. And with every contraction, the time at which you're expected to push, his heart rate kept dropping, indicating he was in distress and I couldn't get him out. So for his safety and my own, a C-section was ultimately the only option. So I've now been torn, 3rd-degree tears from deliveries 1 and 2, and cut from delivery 3. The psychological recovery for me will very likely take longer than the physical, but I'm over a week in, so that's 1 week or so less time I'll be struggling mentally with what has happened to my body. Phobias are not a rational thing, and childbirth, pregnancy, surgeries in general have actually always borderline phobia level for me. I don't like surgical procedures. I don't like swelling. I don't like stretching skin and crevices, needles, scalpels, and anything related. The idea of anything piercing the skin makes me feel queasy. And I also feel uncomfortable around people who have just been surgically cut. And the same applies to myself, except I live with myself by definition, so it's an even worse situation. Apologies for the noise. There's construction going on in my backyard and I can't do anything about it. So I now have what is about a 7-inch scar that will never heal. I mean, it'll heal, but it's always going to be there. Don't get me wrong, I love my children and I would do this all again 100% of the time, but it doesn't remove the physical and psychological trauma of what I have gone through and what I'm going through now. Something women go through every day, I know, and from what I see, handle it just fine. So outside of those who develop postpartum depression, I actually do feel like I'm alone in this. Or people just don't talk honestly about their feelings, and that's a very common thing too. So from the second I was informed I'd be having a C-section, after having already suffered the local trauma that was trying to deliver the traditional way, I started shaking and crying uncontrollably. Didn't stop as they wheeled me to the surgical suite, loaded me onto the surgical table, spread my arms out like I was on the cross. That is not meant to be a biblical reference at all. I just don't know how to describe it otherwise. There was a long, thin table and 2 straight arms forming a cross, and my arms were strapped on either side of these blocks, like being strapped to a cross. It felt like an out-of-body experience, but I do remember everything. So the OB had guessed, but wasn't sure, or made some kind of, suggestion based on her experience that I'd be able to get Jamie out if I just pushed hard enough. But given I didn't really understand the constant instruction to bear down like I was on the potty, yes, being a grown adult, I don't have much experience using a damn toddler potty. And even in the throes of child labor, I abhor being spoken to like I'm a child. But anyway, I couldn't get past the anger of this grown, educated adult doctor looking at me and telling me to pretend I'm on the potty. But anyway, that's not relevant. She figured this was just my failure as an adult pooper. So we kept at it for a long time, probably longer than I should have had to have kept going at it, while she essentially blamed me for the baby not being able to come out. Meanwhile, my body was partially paralyzed, and I didn't have the control to do anything at all differently. Okay, yes, this was partially my fault. I did press that epidural button quite a few times. That didn't help. But there were controls on the amount I was able to have, and they should have controlled it better. Apparently, Jamie didn't like all the drugs. I don't remember how that was evident, but between that and the failed attempt to get him passed, it just wasn't going to work. By the way, it seems like this video is about my birth experience. I didn't know what this was going to be going into it, but now we know. Before calling another OB for a consult, the doctor wanted to try slowing my contractions because, as I mentioned, they were putting the baby in distress and they were coming actually really, really fast. So this method of slowing down my contractions was, of course, a shot in my arm, because why not solve all of our problems with painless pills? This was one of the most painful shots I had ever received. I don't remember in the least what the medication was called, but the needle pinched hard, sometimes like it does. Then the liquid burned hot fire on the way in, only for her to call in the consult about 30 seconds later to determine, oh yeah, it's not possible. And so they proceeded to prep me, and as part of this process, down the drain also went my almost 15 years of bikini and Brazilian waxes only. I hadn't kept up with my every 4 to 6 week schedule out of caution, being inside in a small room. I haven't really gone since COVID, maybe twice in 2021, and only once since conceiving. But yeah, in preparation for the procedure, I was shaved with what looks like a disposable razor. And now that I think about it, there wasn't even any shaving cream or emollient provided at all. So there's that. They really don't treat women in labor with any kind of respect or dignity. But a few minutes later, I was wheeled to the surgical suite. I cried, I trembled from being in labor, because that's actually a thing, trembling, but also because I was terrified. I trembled with tears and terror as they cut open my abdomen and took out the baby. Never on television do they actually portray the actual experience of getting a C-section. It took about an hour, and I was jostled and pushed in multiple directions as I dug through my insides. I had always assumed it was a relatively gentle procedure, but evidently it takes some muscle from the doctor. On TV, people are always just sitting there perfectly still, chatting, excited. It's not a high-stress situation, unless, of course, it's like some kind of medical emergency, and the doctor's in and out. That is not how it works. I did not expect to be, tossed to and fro as they very aggressively took him out. So Nick sat next to me and he held my hand, the one time I was ever actually comforted by physical touch. And I cried and shook and kept mumbling about how they were cutting me open and that my stomach would be ruined forever, which I guess it is. Between my diastasis that I have from Layla and now this is a lot for me to deal with. The anesthesiologist, who by the way was fantastic though, kept trying to console me as well by saying everything would be okay. And I guess in the end, in the grand scheme of everything, it is. Nick more understood what was going through my mind though, because he knows about my absolute fear of being cut. So after an hour or so, Jamie was out. I didn't even attempt to look at him because I was so psychologically wrecked to want to, but that's pretty consistent. I didn't look at Aiden or Layla after they were born either. I also prefer when the babies are clean. Which brings me to a slight tangent. This new baby smell so many people are obsessed with, I always thought it's such a weird, sort of gross thing to covet, because the same way you marinate raw chicken in lemon juice, salt, and other spices, and it smells a certain way, kind of like the spices that you're marinating in it, the baby has been marinating in amniotic fluid and other bodily fluids for 9 months. So when people swoon over new baby smell, are they really going gaga over the smell of amniotic fluid, blood, and other uterine fluids? Anyway, I like my babies clean. So Jamie is now about 2 weeks old, and I'm finding I'm more attached to him than I was to Aiden and Layla at this stage. Not at all to say I like him or love him anymore. I think it's because I'm no longer working. The children now being my career. I was sending and responding to work emails while I was in the hospital bed with Layla, and all I could think about was getting her out, getting out of the hospital, and then in a few weeks' time, shuffling her to daycare and using the rest of my maternity leave to take classes or exercise or whatever it may be, just to make the most of my time off before I had to ultimately go back to work. Similar thing with Aiden. With Jamie, I don't have the looming deadline of having to return to work. This is it. Mommy and me, here we come, which I've never done with either of them before, so this is going to be a whole new experience. So anyway, I feel like I can take my time and actually enjoy the experience of having a newborn. I never really enjoyed the newborn stage before, but I'm actually really enjoying him. And I'm grateful for that. Setting aside all of my insecurities about now being a stay-at-home mom and not bringing home any income, I'm actually really, really glad to be able to do this, when this is the only thing that I need to be doing. So Jamie's here. He's sleeping, so I'm not going to wake him up for the purposes of this video. Full head of hair and everything. Alright, I'll show other pictures of him, but I don't want to wake him up just for a video. Since this is a hair channel, let's bring it back a little bit. It is worth noting that this boy was blessed with a full set of thick, shiny hair on delivery. I thought Aiden had a lot of hair at birth, but this is so much more. He's also sleeping on satin, of course, just like the other two did. So anyway, we both survived delivery. I'm battling this emotional wreck that was my already fragile emotional state pre-labor. And I'm glad to be done. My childbearing years are over. Oh, and one more thing about this experience. Once I reached the surgical room, shaking and crying, if not bawling, and all alone because Nick had to wait outside while they prepped the room, the doctor asked me, like a few minutes before they were going to start cutting, if I wanted to have my tubes tied. I was not in the state to make such a decision with like a 1-minute deadline, and this was not something I had ever really considered, because why would they have been in there in the first place? I just thought I would have a regular, natural delivery, so why would I have been thinking about getting my tubes tied? I said no. In hindsight, I wish I had said yes, and to the doctor's point, since she'd already be in there, she could just do this with no added trauma. But I wish she had asked me while Nick was there so he and I could have 5 minutes to think about it together, rather than about 5 seconds on my own while I was in the state that I was in, for me to consider this on my own. I would have liked to have asked questions about the procedure, what getting your tubes tied actually means, looks like, recovery, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I didn't. But I wanted 3 kids. Our house has 3 kids' bedrooms. 3 kids could sit in the back of a standard car. 3 leaves 1 backup for when 2 of them get into a fight. And I'm done. Aiden, Layla, and Jamie are my 3 prized possessions, and I love them all equally with my entire self. Despite this little gem Aiden wrote to me a few days ago after Jamie was born. Keep in mind, by the way, that Jamie sleeps almost all day and actually really isn't that much work. He's easier than golden baby Aiden somehow. Aiden got a full week with his Gownie. That's his nickname for Nick. My mother and my sister hung out with him while we were in the hospital. They stayed with him. Nick came home daily to see both him and Layla, and he has not lost a single moment of attention. But dramatic kids will be dramatic kids. And I don't say that based on this one incident. I've said multiple times in comments and probably in videos that Layla is drama queen personified. Well, Aiden is the king to Layla's queen, but like not in an incestuous way, obviously. So that's it for now. There's so much more on my mind, but if I continue, this video will never end. Let me know if you would like a video going into depth on anything that I have mentioned, but I think I pretty much covered it, and I need to get back to my hair content at some point. The children are fine. Jamie's here. It's actually pretty cute for an infant, and he sleeps well. We've had a few bad nights when he needed food like every 20 to 30 minutes, but I choose to believe that those are flukes. He sleeps 5 or so hours at a time throughout the night sometimes, meaning only 2 feedings, which if you've had babies, you know that that is not bad. Before I go, quick update on my hair. My recovery has been incredibly painful, and Nick got essentially 1 week of paternity leave despite my not being able to pick up anything heavier than Jamie for the next 6 weeks or so. I can't lift Layla, so I have to fashion some way of her being able to climb out of her crib every morning, so that's fun. And, there's that. Jamie was born on a Sunday. We left the hospital on Wednesday. Nick went back to work the following Wednesday. I don't blame him. It's not his fault. I guess I'm just supposed to figure it out, like women have always had to figure these kind of things out. I now have 3 children under my charge right now, while Aiden and Layla are still not in school, and I continue to homeschool Aiden. I don't have any time to do anything with my hair, so I'm going to leave the braids in at least until I recover physically. In the grand scheme of time, this long break, I realize this is a really long break from hair content, will be a blip, so I'm taking comfort in that. Had I the time, I could instead load up on my ingredient reviews to get a little ahead, but I honestly don't have the capacity to do anything other than recuperate and to take care of the children. If I get some extra time, I might sometimes take care of myself, but that's not even something that gets prioritized on a daily basis. I will be back, and I do want to thank you all for sticking around. I know this has been such a long break, but honestly, I am actually in so much pain. It has been a really, really bad recovery for me. Taking all the psychological stuff out of it, a C-section is actually a really painful procedure. But that being said, before I leave, I just want to say this video is not meant to scare anyone about getting pregnant and giving birth. Millions of women do it every day, probably. Some women love pregnancy and love giving birth. I don't understand how the hell, but it's a fact. My 3 experiences have been horrific, but I do them all over again, just not a 4th time. All right, I'm done. Many thanks for watching. And if you like my content and haven't done so already, please consider subscribing, comment, and share. And I'll talk to you in my next one. Thanks, and have a good one.